Hello humans, hello humans. Let me see if that'll make any difference. Probably not. I don't have any artificial light here. Here we go, okay, because the sunlight's so bright. Anyway, it's the 8th of November. It's about 11:38 in the morning. I wanted to talk for a few minutes about, I don't want to get lost in too many weeds, but basically about ontology and paradigms and narradimes and all that kind of stuff. Not going to go into too much in the way of data stuff or forecasts for what's going to go on here, but there's a few that will pop up. I'm only going to talk for a little bit because there's phone calls and other things that are going to occur here. Anyway, most humans, most adult humans, cannot change their mind, okay? This is a truism, and you'll see it repeated in science and even like military journals and stuff where they talk about off in order for the new paradigm to take over. So you see that in science, you'll see it in mathematics, everywhere, even philosophy and politics, right? And so what they're basically codifying by saying, oh, you know, those guys are too stuck in the mud to adopt to the new ways to get hip to what's going on. And so right? And they're basically stating to you that humans, as a rule, do not change their minds once they're set. So that's why I was saying I've been out with berries and there's some people burning stuff. Yeah, I've been getting some huckleberries, the last of the huckleberries on these 2 prime bushes. Anyway, so that's why I had said most adults, right? It's actually somewhat rare to see adults that can change their mind. By that I mean, you know, you can change preferences, you can change outlooks, you can change your mind that way, but I mean change your mind at a fundamental level on something, right? To understand that you had at some point accepted something, it's wrong, whether it's your idea or not. If it's your idea, you're even more reluctant to change your mind because you have an emotional attachment to it for your ego and all this other stuff. But nonetheless, even this stuff that you didn't originate, you may not be able to actually function if you try and change your mind around some of this stuff, okay? And this is just the way humans are built. And it has to do with the structure of our mind and or structure of our brain and how our mind maps to that. And these structures are taken advantage of by such things as, you know, advertising or military indoctrinations or interrogations. All different kinds of things, right? Even they take advantage of this in the indoctrination of minds in the, you know, you decide, oh my God, I got to dye my hair purple and cut my nuts off. No, that comes in through the indoctrination industry, okay, because it's all over. And so our minds are, if you want to examine our reality in a particular way, every one of the inputs that hits your mind that is not natural in the sense of, you know, walking on a road and, you know, and seeing the stuff around there, but every one of the inputs that hits your mind is in fact some form of the expression of the indoctrination industry. Now, they don't see it that way because, you know, it's the tire company giving you a tire company advertisement. The tire company does not see itself as part of this vast indoctrination industry. But nonetheless, it really is. Okay, so these indoctrination industries count on particular patterns that form within our minds as a result of the way that our brains work and the things we've been exposed to the point that those adverts become aware, or that we become aware of those advertisements, right? And then they're counting on, the advertisers are counting on particular kinds of triggers in your mind to get you to buy their product. And they're counting on those things existing. And so you will note that this is region-specific, country-specific, language-specific, all of these kind of things. They all point to the fact that there are individuated different structures in different humans' minds based on where they live and stuff. So a car company ad or a tire company ad from Brazil, even if translated over and made in the United States, but if it kept the exact same language and so on, wouldn't fit. We wouldn't respond to it because we don't have in us, in the United States, those same set of trigger points that the people in Brazil do, or Africa, or Australia, or wherever the hell, right? And so the trigger points are different, and the language pointing, or the language buttons on each of those trigger points are different. And so the ad does not work. So you can't take an ad from Africa and expect it to sell that product here in the United States. You can take an ad from Africa, and if you were a smart ad guy, you could use that ad to sell the same product in the United States, but basically you would have to wrap a culturally appropriate advert around that, okay? This is all the result of the way that our consciousness interacts, so our minds, right? Our consciousness interacts with our minds, and how that functions within the expression of our brains. Okay, so most people, in my experience, cannot change their minds. It's extremely difficult. And as I say, we see this repeatedly reinforced in literature over time about one generation of a skill having next generation can bring out these new things that they've developed or come across or whatever. In my opinion, we're at one of these points here in our reality, in that what's going to occur is that there will be, okay, so when I say most people, that's true, but I have no way of categorizing or quantifying that in a meaningful fashion. We could pick a number, but that number would simply be triggering some part of our brains, and it would not necessarily in any way be a true or even a close approximation of what's going on. And here's another aspect of this. We're at a point where we're leaving behind the gritology that got us here, that came up out of the understanding of reality in the Kali Yuga, okay? And we're going into an ontological model of reality. And this is a radical shift, and we're going to get into some of the radii of that shift, okay? And how strange this really is. But because of the level of discontinuity between the two forms of viewing of reality, it's basically going to be a case of where the population now will be self-dividing, and there will be those people that pick up on the ontological viewpoint and those people that do not. Then the ontological viewpoint will continue on from here. But it is, in my opinion, kind of a wasted effort to try and put too much energy into getting most people to adopt the ontological model, because they won't be able to do it easily unless they're trained into it. We don't have those training materials yet because we're just now exploring this, because it's been forbidden for us to even think about it for over 120 years. And so we have to build up an infrastructure for really getting into it. So this is not like exploration of an ontology 101, right? That's not my function here. I'm an explorer into ontology too. I'm just ahead of a lot of other people. And maybe the notes I make will eventually end up in somebody's college coursework, exploration of ontology 101, that kind of thing, right? But that's not our point here, because everybody involved in this at this stage is truly an explorer, because we are launching off into the unknown we're launching off from a base that we cannot return to, okay? So I've changed my mind, and I'm one of those people that is able to do that. I won't go into why why that arises. Okay, I won't go into that, but nonetheless, I changed my mind, and at some point, I decided that no, the reality that has been proffered to me that I'm supposed to construct in my mind to fit the common shared model of reality, such that I can interact with other humans, that the reality they're describing is bogus. It doesn't exist. And no wonder none of their math works out. No wonder we don't have space flight or any of this other shit, because their reality, their starting point from that reality, and their end goal of that reality, because of where they start, will never ever be able to be achieved, and it's entirely an illusion. Okay, a crafted illusion that had been put in place, had money behind it and people behind it, so it had energy to sustain itself. So in my opinion, it was deliberately put there. The ontology wanted us to encounter that idea. It wanted us to understand, and this is an example of how you have to deal with being in an ontological reality. But the ontology allowed that to exist. It created the conditions that the obscuring of the ontology as a model, as an effective way to navigate through our reality. It allows that to exist. And so therefore, there is a point for us to encounter that illusion, educate ourselves, and get beyond it. In other words, the ontology provides the process of initiation. So that's exploration is also self-initiation into the ontological model. And as I say, you cannot go back. So once you leave the gritology world behind and contemplate the idea that we live within an ontology, then everything changes in terms of how you think about those things that are manifesting within your perception within that ontology. It gets really complicated. We don't have a lot of language. The language that we are forced to use now must reduce down to denotations only, because we can't trust our connotations, because those are formed by emotional attachments that were created while we existed under the false paradigm. And so you have to be aware of yourself thinking about the ontology and how the previous experience has tainted your ability to even see the ontology. It was quite deliberate, as I say, in my opinion, and has had residual effects. And then we need to explore this ontology and our interaction with it, because, in the Cathari tradition, they say universe provides and guides. My eyes to see, my voice to say, my, how wondrous is each day. That's one of the stanzas in this this mantra series, okay? And but the point is that universe provides and guides, and thus you have to understand, thus the repetition of that gets you to understand that your daily movements and interactions are also, no matter who you meet that day, you're also always only meeting the ontology, because it's created all of us. It has indeed created everybody you're ever going to meet, and it is directing the activities such that you do meet them and do have these interactions. And so it's a goofy kind of, from a grit viewpoint, it's a very goofy kind of a way to conduct a common shared reality. And there's where you also get into other aspects that at the moment we have to be very careful about, thus the language. So we can't just say reality, because reality to the gritologist is not reality that the ontologist lives within. The idea of the ontologist is that all of this is basically an illusion. It is an illusion, that there is no movement in universe, and that even that is an illusion. Separation is an illusion, identity is an illusion, etc., etc., etc. Doesn't mean you can't use these illusions for making yourself a very nice life and be happy and all of that kind of stuff. But you need to think about how you're going to use these illusions in an entirely different way. And this actually is so becoming an ontologist means that you can't go back to the grit-only viewpoint, right? So if you're a gritologist, if you're an Einstein, if you're an Eric Weinstein, if you're a Brian Keating, any of these people, many of whom, most of them are Jewish, you're going to be a gritologist, and you're going to have this idea that science cannot consider consciousness in any aspect of consciousness when it does science. That science is like the Large Hadron Collider is worthwhile, and it's seeking a God particle, the ultimate smallest particle from which all consciousness originates, from which consciousness can originate. The gritologists believe that, so in other words, they believe things exist absent perception of them. All of these kinds of beliefs leave all these holes in their science. This is why even their top dog scientists, mostly trolls and plagiarists like Einstein, but even they would say, you know, oh, after this point, it's all, what's the phrase? Weird fucking effects and magic, something along those lines, right? You know, spooky effects at a distance. It's because they don't understand the ontology, right? So their viewpoint is so limited that they must invent these non sequiturs that are labels that they are hoping you won't investigate. Now we've reached this point here where there's actually rebellion occurring online, admittedly not in the classroom, but rebellion in advanced college courses at Harvard, Yale, all these other places, in physics and quantum physics and this kind of stuff, because everybody's saying, the students are saying, wait a second, you know. Well, this one guy phrased it very well. He said in his entire coursework in the quantum stuff, he never knew how he should approach any problem that was given to him unless he went outside of his own thinking to someone else. So even if quantum existed and was a viable methodology, they're certainly not teaching it well enough for him to become a quantum engineer, and that's what he was taking, was a class in quantum engineering. And he expected it to be something along the order of, you know, vector diagrams, solving, you know, Cartesian mathematics kind of things. So he was quite disappointed, but he's not alone. There are hundreds of these kids that are bitching and moaning on Reddit and all of these other forum out there about not being able to learn how to do anything with the, which is, as I say, all based on grit. That, you know, and the grit thinks that if you get enough of the God particles together and squish them together, you'll get some kind of consciousness that you can manipulate and deal with. And it'll actually be conscious and so on. And so they don't grasp the ontology. In fact, they deliberately exclude it. I've actually heard Brian Keating years ago, he's this physicist guy who has a podcast, talking to Eric Weinstein, and Brian Keating said something you know, about excluding consciousness from the equation. That, you know, that the only good science, you know, starts with grit, basically. Anyway, so they're 100% wrong, and that's why we've been in this, you know, lost century kind of stuff that Stephen Greer's label for these last 100 years, I think it goes back over 150 years actually, that we've been deliberately hamstrung here with these with this fake physics. And, you know, I have to say that it arises, in my opinion, from, it was like the 51st or 53rd book in the Talmud. And it basically, okay, so here is the fundamental truism. So the Talmud is this 63 volumes of Jewish people writing commentary and comedy and all this other stuff about, sort of in a half-assed way, the Torah and the stories of the Elohim. In any event, though, so the guy in one of the books there, the 51st or 53rd, I can't remember which one it was basically saying that all observant Jew activity, that is to say, all the rabbis' work, all the work of all of the observant Jews, is bogus and bullshit in an ontological model, okay? He didn't phrase it that way, but that was his conclusion. And a further conclusion was, thus, the Jews and the rabbis, the rabbinical councils, the Pharisees, the self-described Pharisees, in order for the Pharisees to maintain control, they must do everything they could to prevent ever from the ontological model arising and taking root within humanity, because it instantly is he said it mocked Judaism, okay? And that really truly is the case, because here's the thing. In an ontological model, you view yourself as living within the ontology, as existing within God. In the Jew construct that is the Zohar, they talk about God taking his stomach out so that he could create the universe in his abdomen, which is a really goofy concept, okay? But so they even there, but then they went ahead and they got back to grid again anyway in that book. But nonetheless, so the idea is that you are created within the ontology itself. You exist within this ontology. So you exist within God, if you want to phrase it that way, but you exist within supreme consciousness. You are a small subset of supreme consciousness, and you're right here now. So if that is the case, and that there is only supreme consciousness and matter arises from supreme consciousness, then all of the rituals of the Jew culture are meaningless, okay, because they involve matter. Matter comes after consciousness and is a derivative of the illusion that supreme consciousness is creating for us. So there's no point to a ritual involving matter as an attempt to manipulate the greater consciousness on the other side of it. Hang on a second. So basically, E equals mc squared from Einstein is bullshit. It's a mathematically correct, it's mathematically true, and you can't do anything with it because it's ass backwards. So he's saying that energy is matter moved up to the speed of light, which is stupid because the speed of light itself is a measurement of energetic activity, right? Not matter, okay, in any event, but it's the opposite. Matter is energy that's been condensed, and matter cannot go back up that direction, so to speak, at all ever. So any attempt by a rabbi to, do a specific ritual in order to try and influence greater consciousness and take away your sins or something, or in that regard, alter your relationship with the ontology that you supposedly worship. Any activity, it does not matter how you slice the veins on that sheep. It's never, ever, ever going to take the sins of anybody into any other form of consciousness for you. That is just the wrong view of what's going on. You're seeing it from the wrong side. Okay, so the rabbi says that, he was a rabbi, the guy who wrote this volume in the Talmud. He was saying that the ontology mocks Judaism, and he's quite correct. But ontology, because all of our society is basically created around this idea of grit über alles, grit exists, and then somehow consciousness comes into the picture. Because our whole social order is built around that, ontology mocks us all. All right, and so you have to overcome these impediments to your understanding. This is something obviously the ontology wants you to do. So you can quite legitimately think of this as a training course, as these are initiatory processes that you're involved with, and you are being initiated into a greater understanding by the ontology itself as you explore it, and as you explore the ramifications of living within an ontology on your own mind. Because a lot of your decisions will change, right? This is the idea that they're trying to get across in Shinshin Soitsu Do, the Japanese yoga, is that you can listen and universe will talk to you. And it's always talking to you. You just haven't heard it because you've been a dumbass thinking that it was just grit, okay? And so now you're not a dumbass, now you're exploring the ontology, and all of a sudden you can't go back to being a dumbass, and you can't go back to the matrix. Once you see it, you can't go back to it, right? And so, but now, as you live within the ontology, you understand that there's a great deal more power being able to be derived from an ontological viewpoint than from a grit viewpoint. Power of every level, from being able to travel in the UFOs without time being involved, without duration, and power all the way down to, if one was so inclined, to do things like social manipulation kind of power, right? Those kind of things. Jedi kind of shit, right? But it'll only be Jedi kind of shit for a short period of time, because as we get further and further into the ascending yuga, more and more people will grasp onto this, and then it won't work quite that way, because it's a matter of, in an ontology, it's a matter of the consciousnesses, the local consciousness, all of us guys, involved in the activity as to its outcome. This is why such things as quantum computers, which are a bogus piece of big copper batch machines, have to be so shielded from human consciousness. They've got to go to all kinds of trouble. They've got to lower them down to incredibly cold temperatures in these rooms with cement and steel and stuff to try and shield them from human consciousness, so that our consciousness doesn't bugger up the result. And it can still do that. They're only accurate, so to speak, about 70% of the time at the best. Yet again, proof of an ontology. If they were correct about the idea of a quantum computer, then it would work 100% of the time, and it doesn't. It's a very expensive batch process machine that so far doesn't yield that much in the way of practicality. Like the Large Hadron Collider, it comes from a viewpoint that is bogus. It's approaching from a grit viewpoint and thinking and seeing the ontology shimmering in front of it and not understanding it's an ontology, and it thinks it's a mirror, and so doesn't quite grasp what's going on. If you think it's a mirror, you're only going to see your distorted reflection. You're not going to see the ontology, because the ontology cooperates and works within your mind and your consciousness, obviously. And all the other minds and consciousness around you. This is why RV works, remote viewing works, right? This is why psychic shit works. No amount of Einstein word salad will ever be able to provide a understandable explanation for psychic activity from a grit model. And that's really where we're at now, is that that grit model is breaking down, as I said earlier, and we're about to shift into this ontological viewpoint, this ontological paradigm within an ontology itself. And those of us that are exploring the ontology recognize what we're saying, that it's this internal drill down kind of looping thing going on right now. And the ontology itself is going to help us in this process now that we're aware of it and can understand that it's talking to us and wants to aid us, right? But in my opinion, it's a mistake to provide emotional motivators for the ontology. I'm quite sure the ontology has emotions, and I can go into that, but I'm also quite sure that it has those emotions in a way that humans do not, because human emotions are tied to hormones and body state, okay? And so we don't have that with the ontology, because it does not have a material body in that regard. And in fact, humans with our emotional, or our emotions connected to hormones, to physical activity and stuff, it may be that we form a sensor array, so to speak, such that the ontology can experience emotions at this level. Anyway, without regard to all of that. So we live within this ontology, within our common shared reality that we all participate in creating. We're now coming into this period of time where we've crossed a threshold and we're busting out of the old paradigm and into the new one. In this busting out of the old paradigm and into the new one, it is not a hindsight kind of activity. So usually you say, oh, well, you know, that was the end of the industrial age back then, because the agricultural age, because we invented machinery and put a building around it and created a factory, right? But the people that were doing it at that time were not aware of their crossing that threshold out of the agricultural phase into the industrial phase, all right? And Klaus Schwab is trying to direct us back into grit with his fourth industrial revolution. And it's like, no, Klaus, you're You're back there trying to get us to redo shit we've already done. And the next step up is not simply yet another industrial revolution. It is the step into a new paradigm that is non-grit based, non-industrial based. It's the ontology. And things work differently there. And Klaus Schwab and all of the Jewish people and their structures have no power in the ontology. It mocks them, right? It mocks all of us now. By all kinds of activities, but it especially mocks those that don't see it, because now is the time that you should see it. Now is the time that the ontology is revealing. Okay, this is the secrets revealed at a very, 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 very deep level, at the ultimate deep level. It's not going to percolate up through social order, as I say, all at once. We don't have the technology or the training materials or this kind of stuff to even introduce these ideas into schools. But this ontology model explains all of the spooky effects at a distance. It explains those things that Einstein cannot, and many, 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 many more things in a much better fashion. You know, the psychic activity, all of this sort of thing. And we can all participate in exploring this in a way that you can't under Einsteinian physics unless you're, you know, mathematically inclined and all of that kind of stuff, which is yet another aspect of the elitism kind of shit, right? That's what really ticks me off about, well, about a lot of the physicists out there. They think they're very elitist, but they can't really answer a lot of questions and their mathematics never work out. I read Eric Weinstein's little thing on unifying geometry, and it's a bunch of horseshit. Of course, it's built on a pile of Einstein horseshit, so you know you can't expect it on that kind of a foundation to go anywhere. But it's not quality thinking even so. Now, okay, so this presents us with all kinds of opportunities and challenges. You have to understand, as a result of encountering the ontology, that it exists and that it is participating in your life for its purposes. So this is where I disagree with all of the religions, because I'm not going to put an emotional motivation on any observable pattern that indicates the ontology is communicating. So just because the ontology tells me to turn left and go 5 feet and then stop and turn right, and I do it, does not necessarily mean that it wants me to do that, that it has any feeling about me as an individual, you know. So I'm just a cog in the wheel at that level. So I'm not going to say that I can see the ontology talking to me, I can see what it's saying at times enough to pick up on it, and it has benefited me in doing so. I'll tell you that. That's why I want to keep looking for it, right? But I'm not going to say that the ontology is in any way interested in me as an individual. It's interested in me as an individual for its purposes, not because of who I am or my personality or any of that shit. So, anyway, we're at this point now where we're going to crawl out of the gritology world and we're going to leave behind things like religion. I think that we can do this without the existence of the space aliens intruding too much, but their presence will participate in this because they have an ontological viewpoint. Because they're not getting here with diesel engines, right? And if you're a grit guy, you want to burn shit to create pressure in order to move pistons back and forth, right? you want it to all be matter. Anyway, so that's about it for now. I've got to get some stuff done. I'm going to get calls here real quick. And yes, all right, so now here's where it becomes really interesting. The ontology could be taken as a license to offend, okay? So I could think to myself, this guy is Jewish. And so because he believes in the Talmud and all of that kind of shit, I can be offensive to him because the ontology is with me, and thus I am, you know, but see, you see where that leads, all right? It gets you to the point where, yeah, you can be offensive because your viewpoint is better. His God is in my ontology, so to speak. I win, that sort of thing, right? But then you're bringing up all these emotions, you're getting all involved in it at that level, and that's not necessarily what the ontology wants. Okay, so in essence, so I'm an offensive fellow. I'm very blunt. I'm too old and I'm too tired. But I was basically, I got to tell you, I was this way since I was a kid. I've been an offensive bastard all my life. And I just don't want to put the energy into, you know, coddling you and probably I get a lot of this from my father, who had to teach, had to put guys through basic training and teach them to jump out of airplanes when every fiber in their being was saying, oh. So anyway, you know, so you just don't have, I just don't have that in me to be respectful of the difficulty you're having in my presence, and I'll always be blunt and so on, right? But oddly enough, now that we encounter the ontology and we think about this, the ontology is presenting people to me, and so I could think to myself, oh, that guy came into my sphere of being, of existence and is interacting with me, so obviously the ontology wants me to, you know, abuse the fuck out of him, right? Get these stupid ideas out of his head. But that's not how all this stuff really works. And so you have to think deeper than that. So it is not a license to offend, it's a license to examine yourself within that interaction, within those relationships. Okay, at times, just like with you know, the Taoists and you know, the shaman living in the hill in China, and you know, the enlightened individual and that kind of thing. At times you can be offensive because that's what the ontology wants. It sent you you know, a sniveling bastard that's got to get both the sniveling and the bastard kicked out of him before he's of any use, and it presented him to you to start the process off. So of course you take a, you know, a piece of stick and you beat him until he gets the fuck away from your cave and goes crawling down the hill to understand that, you know, you're not there to serve his needs, right? So there's all these different levels of initiation within the entire process of the ontology constantly going on. So you always, as someone who's exploring the ontology, you always have to keep your ego in check and examine yourself within that ontological interaction that's ongoing at that moment, right? And so, you know, so it's only a license to offend when the ontology tells you that at that moment by you. Otherwise, you've got to really examine what the hell the ontology is trying to tell you and think about it very seriously. You can make mistakes, obviously, and we probably always do continuously. But it's quite fascinating to proceed with it, and we're all going to be forced into it because of the interaction with the space aliens and stuff. But I'm a visionary kind of guy, so I want to get a jump on all of this process. So I'm getting into it now in a pretty interesting level of, I don't want to say science, but scientific exploration, you know, using a scientific method. But science is a religion. Anyway, talk to you guys later.